Emily Elizabeth, and I'm the host of the What Fulfills You podcast, a show for and about individuals always seeking to be their best selves. On this show, we talk all about building the mindset, finding the right careers, creating meaningful relationships, and so much more. Welcome to the What Fulfills You podcast. Hello, friends. Welcome back to your weekly dose of What Fulfills You. My name is Emily Elizabeth. I'm your host. And on today's solo episode, we are going to dive into how to become better at making decisions. And on the second part, we'll dive into trusting your gut and your own judgment without analysis paralysis, we'll call that. And this question was a heavy question, or a heavy hitter rather, during a time I was speaking at my university, and this came up in some shape or form, or multiple forms rather. And I made note of that and decided to turn this into an episode for you guys because I know that feeling. I've been there before. And as always, I preface that I am not perfect. I am not an expert at anything and everything, but I have life experience and I will share from my own experiences, and you guys can take from whatever relates to you or resonates with you. When it comes to becoming better at making decisions, this is something that I would say became a big focus and turning point for me when I read Principles by Ray Dalio. I read this my junior year of college during a time that I was going through a breakup and heavily focused on improving myself as a person, becoming more secure in myself, becoming more confident in myself. And I came across a podcast episode with Tony Robbins and Ray Dalio. It came out around like February 2018. And this was at a time that Ray's book, Principles, was about to launch or had just come out, I think. And I was fascinated by everything he shared on this episode, on this conversation. So I decided to pick up the book. And little did I know that it would end up becoming a really big hit of a book, nor did I realize at the time the impact of Ray Dalio and his work and his knowledge. I think this was kind of maybe the beginning era of Ray Dalio kind of stepping into the media and the more, social media, if you will. So, reading that book helped me learn the foundation of values and principles and how life can become so much easier and simpler just by being able to go back to your values and make decisions based on that. And so that's a big part for me. I've come to learn. I remember I had an aha moment reading that book. I have so many highlights and I was like, oh, wow, that is so true. Like, number one, I realized I don't even know what my own values are. I don't know what my core principles are. And so that's why it is so hard for me to sometimes make a decision or be really sharp in what I want to do, or like what kind of decision I want to make. And I remember part of that is because I didn't really grow up being taught why we have certain values or why we make decisions based on certain things. I think culturally, my lovely Vietnamese parents and the culture that they came from, it's a little bit more of what parents do is correct, and so you should just listen to us. And I have no blame I don't fault anyone for that. But I share that because I know some of you guys who listen also have experienced that. And when I share things that are like that, I know, at least for me, when I hear someone share something like that and it relates a lot to me, it makes me feel understood and seen. So for those of you who have experienced that, I hope that resonates with you. But on the other hand, outside of the values, the principles, and looking at that like the foundation, I also make my decisions in part towards my gut feeling and what my intuition and my gut feeling is saying. And so I mix the two. It's 50% logical, rational, and 50% intuition and gut feeling. And sometimes, yes, it might be more 60/40, 70/30, but I really try to mix both of them. And I have a few examples for you guys in all different parts of my life. I think at least one of these will be something you have experienced personally. The first one that I wrote down is when I moved to Los Angeles and New York City. So, for context, I moved to Southern California when I was 18 from a very small town in Pennsylvania. It's like an hour and a half from Philadelphia. And when I moved to Southern California, it was in Orange County. And so it's not quite Los Angeles. It's like 45 minutes south of Los Angeles, and it's much slower, cleaner, and more of a really affluent suburb city type of place. And I absolutely love Orange County. It is beautiful. It is a great place to live. The weather is great. You just really can't go wrong living in Orange County. But what happened was 5 years in to living in Orange County, this would be then like mid 2020, I started to feel really stagnant and complacent and just out of touch with Orange County. I just didn't feel like this was my environment anymore. So at the time, what also propelled it was that I started dating this cinematographer. And I share that because he was just so different from me in so many ways, but it opened my perspective in a lot of ways. And I remember that was a pivotal point because I started to become more genuinely intrigued by the idea of Los Angeles. And so when I moved to Los Angeles, I think that the whole span of from the idea to decision making and then to the move was all in a span of 4 weeks, which is really fast, right? But I get this kind of inkling by this point, I'm not really quite dating this person anymore. And when I say dating, I really mean like we were lightly dating, we were, seeing each other kind of thing, but it wasn't like a serious partner, right? So I get inspired. I go check it out. I go check out the potential places I could move to. I look at apartments. I do all the logical stuff, the logistical stuff, right? And in terms of logical stuff, when it came to moving, it was two things. Logistically, what is my life going to look like? Do I know some people there, or could I make a friend there, or do I know anyone, right? From college to old roommate to entrepreneur friends, like whoever. At the time, I only knew one person, and by the time I moved there, so like, in a span of 3 weeks, I actually made another friend who was an entrepreneur friend, and that's a whole nother story. But I ended up coming to LA with mainly like two friends, and then the rest of my friends were in Orange County, which is about a 45-minute drive. And realistically, in California, that's not really far. Like going 45 minutes to see your friends is not crazy because in LA, you could go from Venice, where I lived, to West Hollywood, and during traffic, it'll be for sure 45 minutes to 1 hour. So it's not weird to, drive 45 minutes. But yeah, logistically, I felt comfortable, and financially, I was looking for something, rent, can I afford it? What does the cost of living look like? It basically was just rent that was changing. My rent was gonna increase a little bit, but nothing that scared me to a place where I'm like, okay, there's no way I can do this. So I moved to LA. That's the logical reason. And this can, for you, can be to any city. But my gut feeling was that, I remember I drove up to LA, and LA is a very big place. So, there's so many different neighborhoods from West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Brentwood, Santa Monica, Venice, Marina del Rey, Playa Vista, downtown, you name it. And I kind of already had my eye on, the Santa Monica area, Marina del Rey, Venice. Like I knew I wanted to probably live over there, but I was still open-minded to the idea of West Hollywood because that's also kind of a popular area for people my age. Like at the time, I was like, in my early 20s. So I went to look at apartments first in like Venice, Marina del Rey. The first one that I walked into, it ended up being the apartment I lived in, like the very first apartment. And I walked in and I knew it. I was like, ooh, like I think this is gonna be the one, but this is a bit of a price jump from what I was paying in Irvine. And I was like, yeah, we'll have to see, but I think this is the one. And so I think it was like a $700 price jump, which, fun fact, it ended up being the same exact to the dollar rent that I ended up paying in New York the following year. So for 2 years, I had the same exact rent, which also made logistically like life a lot easier. But back to the gut feeling, I just knew deep down like this was the change that was meant for me. Like this is the direction I feel very, very drawn to going towards. And when I drove over to West Hollywood, I had apartment viewing appointments. I drove through the neighborhood, drove down the streets, and I was just like, no, this is just not it. So I ended up not even going to my apartment viewing appointments. I was like, no, I just know that's not where I'm gonna live. So I went home that day and I remember just thinking about it. Then I called my dad. I told him, I think I'm gonna move to LA. And he's like, what? Because this is at this point August 2020. And my brother was actually living in Los Angeles at that time, but he was simultaneously preparing to move to Austin, Texas at the exact same time, like on the week that I was moving to LA from Orange County. So really funny because all that to say, that is kind of my thought process on how I moved to Los Angeles. And the same thing truly happened with New York. Now, New York, I knew for a longer period of time that I wanted to come to New York. It just kind of was that like COVID got in the way. So I kind of waited it out after, the COVID years like 2020 and then part of 2021. But I moved here a year after living in LA. And it was the same thing. Like logistically, I knew, what I needed to do, financially, all of that. And then gut feeling, I just knew like this was the place that was next for me. So yeah, the gut feeling can't really explain, but it's just an energy, when you know, and when you have that feeling too. So that's that. But I always encourage, don't be too whimsical about your decisions either. Create some practical grounds and make sure you have certain things in place, because if you go too much on a whim, again, not to say that you shouldn't go a little bit on a whim, because that's part of life, like that's the excitement of life, but too much of a stretch can also be pretty dangerous. So just finding that sweet spot and trusting yourself based on how you know yourself, I think is my best insight on that. And there are several other things in my life that I made the same decision process, such as choosing between which company I was going to work for out of college, when I transferred universities. So I actually went to UC Irvine for 2 years, my freshman and sophomore year, and then I transferred to Chapman University for my final 2 years, and that was really awesome. Again, logical and gut feeling. What else did I write down here? Ending my 4-year relationship, which was very hard, but also again, I think both logical and gut feeling, I kind of just felt that chapter had ended. Logically, I think it was just that I don't really care to dive into it, but I just knew that we were on different wavelengths. And as like a side tangent to that, I remember that this is so many years ago, so it's kind of easier to talk about, but I remember I once wrote down the type of person that I think would be more on par with my college partner. And I ended up being right, I think. I ended up, well, I'll put it this way. I think he actually ended up with that kind of person, which I genuinely am very happy for, because I do think that my gut feeling on what makes more sense for him and what makes more sense for me, I think is quite true. Even though I can prove it now, but at the time I couldn't prove it, right? But I can prove it now because I think that's actually what how the story unfolded. But I think that's actually something to honor as well, which is that, this person was my first relationship ever. It was my first multi-year relationship ever and my first love. And it was truly a very solid experience. I mean, we broke up at one point and then got back together. But, I think overall, when I look back on that 4-year relationship, it was stable, it was grounding, it had a lot of longevity possibility for sure. I think it was the difference, looking back, is that I have and I had, so present and past, audacious dreams and wanted to kind of maximize the opportunities that life could give you. And I think that, seeing how this person lives now as well, I think that it was just very different from what I ended up doing with my life later on. So, like, speaking in present moment. And that is not, there's nothing wrong about that. You know what I mean? I think my college best friend actually made a good comment about this, which is that it's not that I couldn't have ended up with that person, or it's not that I couldn't marry that person. I certainly could have. But she also mentioned, like, I would be happy if I married that person, but I wouldn't be fulfilled. And ironic, because that's my podcast, right? About life fulfillment. And so I think that's kind of the mix of logical and gut feeling when I made that decision. And that's not to say that things like that are easy. I have a friend that recently ended a 7-year relationship, and it's just, it's not black and white, you know what I mean? But I think that's why I really encourage trying to understand yourself and lean into both the rational thought process, what it is that you want in life, what it is that just makes sense to you, and what you're willing to be a little bit flexible on as well, right? There's like that sweet spot of being firm in who you are and what like is true to who you are at your core, and also being a little bit flexible because you know that with partnership, with long-term teamwork and team play, like there's a little bit, you got to be a little bit more fluid. But yes, naturally, if you're too fluid, whether you consciously know it or not, you will give up too much of yourself, and that just ends up backfiring whether you even wanted that or not. So that's kind of why I like logically ended that relationship, because I just knew that um it would backfire most likely, if I didn't, like, again, I would be happy but not fulfilled. And then I think a good last example is when I quit my corporate job and I started my marketing agency and went full time with my marketing agency. The logical side of that was, again, finances. So I just decided to pick a goal, which is to match my salary at the time. And once I match my salary with my marketing clients, then I'll leave my corporate job. And on the gut feeling side, it just started to creep up on me about 6 months before I actually left. And around month 3, I think it started eating me more and more each day. Like, it was just, I really need to fucking do this. And when I started to bring it up with my entrepreneur friends, 2 of them told me, you need to put money on the table. You need to put this in the calendar. You need to put a deadline of when you are leaving. And if you don't do it by this date, you owe each of us $500. And I will tell you, it is a great strategy. I highly recommend it. If you know that you need to add external pressure, do it. External pressure makes you move way faster than you can imagine, because within the 2 weeks, and then I ended up quitting before the actual deadline, I got my first 2 clients. And it was just through having that deadline, I realized the power of why deadlines make us prioritize and make us work faster. So I have incorporated that in my own life in different ways. But yeah, like I said, just, logical and gut feeling. My gut feeling, I just knew it was time for a shift. It was time for my chapter at this corporate sales job to end. And it was time to finally start to do this marketing agency. But I can't just jump ships without having some solid grounds, without having money to pay the bills. So how am I going to find this sweet spot? Okay, let me just match my salary, right? And that, of course, should also kind of like please my parents, right? If they're not, to be honest, too, when I left my corporate job, I didn't quite tell my parents. That was a conscious choice. And I'm not advising you to do that, but it is something that I was slightly advised to do by my own entrepreneur friends in good faith. And I think the reason is that, and Paige Lindgren, who was on the podcast last week, the recent guest, she said the same thing when it came to starting her career as a nutritionist and an online creator and going full time with that, which is that sometimes people outside can ruin the energy or can kind of feed their input too much or give too much of their negative energies. And it's very, very easy to absorb that and then to forget your own self belief, no matter how strong you are. So, certain things it is better to do without external input. And so, I actually quit my job and then told my parents after the fact. And I was very happy about that because I had a lot more clarity in making that decision and then the weeks after. I didn't feel bombarded because by the time I told my parents, the one that was more upset and more shocked, I knew that whatever they were going to say, it wasn't going to be as impactful anymore because it's already done. It's already 3 weeks out, like it's already in the past now. There's nothing to do about the past. So that's something just for food of thought, just some food for thought if you also struggle with parents' input or, again, I want to say I know parents are always trying to give their best advice and looking out for you, but there is a fine line as you become more of an adult on your own, as you enter life in your 20s. There is a fine line between who knows best. And as you get to know yourself better, you start to realize and separate yourself from who you are and what you want for your own life compared to the person that your parents wanted you to become and what they want for your life. And I say that with all love to parents. I know all parents are trying their best and they are only speaking and doing from the place that they know, right? Like they don't know any better besides the tools that they're given. But sometimes if you want to propel in life and kind of go forward a little bit further, sometimes you just have to do that on your own and hope that the people that love you and support you will still love and support you because you are doing something that feels right for you. So the second part to this is about trusting your judgment without too much analysis paralysis or trusting your own decisions and feeling confident in your own decisions, right? So I'll start by saying this. Something I have observed a lot is people often struggle with trusting their own decisions when they have taken too much input from other people in life to make certain decisions. I would say this often comes from parents, right? Most likely, right? When it comes to where you're going to go to school, what you're going to wear, maybe even the level of influence of who your friends might be. And when I was 20 years old, I think, or maybe even 19, I started to make my own decisions without taking too much of my parents' input. And I think it was when I made the decision to transfer universities, which is something that I wouldn't say both of my parents disagreed with, but I know one certainly was, like, okay, what the heck? Do you even know what you're doing? I don't even think this is a good decision. All of it. I think it was just the early practice of making decisions and being a little bit more firm than I might have felt, a little bit more firm about what those decisions are. So transferring universities was one of them. Moving to LA was definitely one of them. Ending my relationship, a lot of things I did without even, telling them. But this part is just practice. It takes repetition. It takes practice. I would probably just start with small ones. I remember a basic one that came to mind too is I took my first solo trip when I was in college, and this was my senior year of college, and I took a solo trip to Portland, Oregon, and I went during the fall season. It was amazing. It was the best time. I knew that one of my parents would have a problem with me solo traveling, and so I did the smart thing by not telling them. And so I would say that's an example of me building the confidence early on, which is, not being irrational, but I'm like, hey, look, I'm gonna go, 3 nights on a solo trip. I really want to go to Portland during the fall. I've never been. So I tell my boyfriend, I tell my best friends, right? Like I tell people that are very connected to my life in the worst case scenario. Certain people had my locations. I was completely fine. And I went ahead and did it. And after the fact, what happened? I felt more confident. I felt more confident in my decisions. I felt more confident in taking a solo trip. I felt more confident in being able to navigate a little bit of a new place by myself. So, you just have to start somewhere, right? Keep in mind, like, let's say before that solo trip, I was going to coffee shops by myself. I took day trips by myself. Like, I'm talking like I would drive somewhere, this is before living in New York. So I would drive from Orange County to San Diego, which is like an hour to an hour and a half. And I would just drive around and explore. I would try different restaurants, coffee shops, malls, like beaches, whatever. I would play around with photography at the time. Like, I was just trying everything. So, leading up to a solo trip for my first one, it wasn't like I went from zero to solo trip, right? So you want to start small and then slowly build up to it. And I think that this is just a natural process when you have enough repetition, the analysis paralysis goes away. When it came to times when I had analysis paralysis, it's been a long time, so I can't say that I fully remember what it feels like to be in that moment, but I think what I usually did was that I just made the jump. Like, I often would lean towards doing the thing that scared me more than holding back. So I chose the thing that scared me, right? So taking the solo trip, buying the flights, that probably scared me. Or taking a day trip by myself scared me. Going to a coffee shop by myself with my laptop, that probably scared me at some point. So that's kind of my 2 cents on how to do something without overthinking it. And now that I've gotten more years of experience in my life, now I just review my past decisions and I reflect. Did I make the right call? Was that the right decision? So I look at my life, ending a 4-year relationship or going on a one-way trip to a foreign country and then meeting a guy there, and then dating him, like, and I also think about quitting my job, starting my company, podcasting, moving to LA, moving to New York. So many of those decisions as well were also not agreed upon or supported by emotionally from parents or family, right? Or just from people close to me. And so I share all of that because I do know what it feels like to make a decision on something where you're not supported and you're not, like, oh, that's so amazing, Emily, like, congrats or good for you. There was a lot of resistance to me moving to LA. Like, I know, one of my parents, like, they were just absolutely not okay with it. And then when it came to traveling and living in this foreign country for a bit, that was also not supported, and even, yeah, quitting my job wouldn't have been supported. So luckily I have many examples now, even the solo trips as well. I do a lot of those things where I'm very mindful of what I share beforehand and what I share after. So, like, beforehand, like before the trip, I might not share too much, or else the person's anxiety could feed into my energy. And then afterwards, it's a little bit easier to share. But like I said, the more reps you have, the easier it gets, and the more confident you will get with trusting yourself and trusting your own decisions. I think this is like anything in life, right? The more you lift weights, the stronger you get. The more you do something, the more consistent it feels, the more consistent it gets. And that's just how it becomes easier, like where you don't have to think of it, right? It's the early days and the early weeks that are the harder part. I also want to share on a kind of a side tangent an example that I wrote down where my decision and thought process in this didn't really have logic, but it was more gut feeling. And I noticed when I reflect that this often comes down to our decisions related to other humans and related to relationships, whether that's romantic, friends, colleagues, whatever. I had a relationship experience where, how do I really explain it? It was essentially an experience where I think to the outside, it logically made no sense as to why I continued to put effort in, as to why I continued to just be the way that I was, which is, trying everything that I could and pouring into it. And I will say at this stage of my life, in my late 20s, I guess you could say, I look back through all of my romantic dynamics and all of my relationships, even my platonic ones, and despite how some moments can be difficult emotionally when it came to the level of effort I gave or how much I tried, I actually talked about this with a really good friend of mine, and he knew when I was doing this at the time, or I was like giving full effort to this relationship dynamic. He acknowledged that, hey, look, like you talk about it all the time, you didn't regret it. And I think that's kind of the thing is that I think most people would say logically, this makes no sense. You're not getting what you want or whatever. And yes, while all of those things on paper may be true, like certain things don't logically make sense, the heart is still the heart, right? Like the heart feels what it feels, the gut feeling feels what it feels. And I just intuitively knew, despite it being very against my own logic, I was like, I need to just see this through. And while the outcome ended up being, just what it was, like I did not end up with this person, I have zero regrets on my efforts, and I have zero regrets on trying for perhaps one could say longer than I needed to. And, people I see often are fearful of love and getting hurt. I like to remind all of us that in order to have the best things in life, the risk of having that and getting that also comes with the worst things in life. So without pain, there can't be happiness because you can really only know the opposite ends of the spectrum if both exist, right? And so I absolutely empathize with people that are afraid to get hurt and are afraid to feel those harder feelings that come about through our human interactions and the nature of life. But I would go and encourage you to explore that more, to be willing to put yourself out there and know, almost not expecting it, but just knowing that, hey, I understand the risk that putting myself out there, being vulnerable, or going all in, or telling the person that I really like you, or hey, I would love to get to know you. Understand that the risk is that that person just might not want the same with you. And that is okay. You will survive. It is also easier for me to say because I have been through breakups before. I have navigated a lot of things that people naturally kind of navigate a little bit more towards like mid to late 20s or early 30s. Like I went through my first breakup at the age of 20, but contextually that breakup was during a time we were living together. We were on the same apartment lease. We shared a one bedroom together. We also shared a dog together. And I was transferring universities and he had just graduated college. So when I tell my girlfriend now, she's 21, she's like, how the fuck did you go through that at the age of 20? And all I can say is to the person listening, to you who's listening, that was not a pretty time in my life, but I knew, oh my Lord, did I know? I knew deep down that that stage of my life, what I was experiencing, was going to help me so much. Have I experienced other difficult and emotionally difficult things in my life since that? Yes. But I will admit that I feel like I was hit with a full truck, like full ass truck, at such an early stage of my life. And yes, hard, super hard because my friends at the age of 20 and 21 do not and could not relate to that, like the extent of what I was going through. But at the same time, I think it propelled me to learn more about myself, dive into personal development, to want to become a better person and to want to inspire and help others like you to also become a better and more fulfilled person and to live a more fulfilling life. And so I think that's all that to say, not every decision and choice you make in life will be logical ever, but it's up to you to decide whether the aftermath was that worth it? Was that the right decision? And only you can say that. Don't ever let someone try to tell you or talk into you that doing that was wrong or a waste of time. Like, no, that's for you to decide. Only you who lived that experience can speak on that. And I say this with passion because I've been there, where I've been around a person or people who might try to tell me what my lived experience was supposed to feel like or was to be like. And it's only with time and with more life in me. Like, I've heard that when I was 22, I've heard that when I was 23, but now I can say with more confidence that, oh, I am so glad that I chose to live my life the way I did, because it feels much more like who Emily Elizabeth is, right? Someone else's decision and someone else's advice is more of who they are, and it's more of how they would live. And there's absolutely nothing, nothing wrong with that. But there's also nothing wrong with how you want to live your life as well. And so I think I'll leave it with that. As long as you don't wish you did something differently, or if that's your goal, that your goal is to maximize opportunity and room for not regretting, then I think I would kind of sit with that as well when you think about, okay, which one is better. So in examples of relationships, whether you give it a try or you fucking walk out, that's up to you, right? There is no black and white answer. It's about the question of, if you left right now, would you still have any lingering, slightly lingering questions about, did I give it my full chance? Because I know in that dynamic that I talked about, and I think in every dynamic I've been in, I look back and I gave it my absolute all, and I have zero regrets, because I live with much more certainty that way, and I know with firmness I absolutely 1000% tried. Same thing in my own work, my own career. Like, did I give 1000%? And if I didn't, I just know. That's also a gut feeling. I know if I didn't. And so for me personally, my personality is that if I didn't give my 1000%, it lingers. It lingers, and it's loud and it's clear. And then what happens? I usually have to like go and like give it another try. And that's actually what I did in my very first relationship. I remember that after we broke up the first time, he broke up with me, and that was like a difficult stage. Like, I kind of pursued that relationship, and I pursued the process of us getting back together for probably like at least a couple of months. I let it slide for like a few months, but then after like 3 months of being broken up, I certainly, started to pursue in a way. And yeah, I remember looking back, I can't say that I had full support from everyone and all my friends, but I don't regret it. It was the right call. Um, yeah, look, it's kind of crazy because it's so long ago, but I was young, I was 20 years old, and um, I just knew, gut feeling, it made no sense, and I knew that yes, I am a girl kind of trying to pursue this guy and kind of trying to convince him that, things have evolved and changed, and I don't know. There was no logic to it. I just knew. And I don't regret it. So I think that's the most important. I knew that that was the right call. So I will leave you with that. I hope this episode was thought-provoking, insightful, gave you something to think about as you navigate your own life, your own decisions, your own choices, going into the new year, going into the holidays, especially this time is more self-reflective, it's a little bit slower. And so I hope this episode gave you that. And as always, I really appreciate it when you let me know when a certain topic or episode hits for you. I love seeing your feedback. I love hearing your feedback. So you can always message me on Instagram at Emily E. Duong or at What Fulfills You. And if you haven't yet, it would mean the world if you could rate and review the podcast on Apple or Spotify. Everything you can find is linked in the show notes. Thank you again for tuning in. I will chat with you all in the next one.